The Spongebob movie, Sponge on the Run, has one of the most bizarre and inconvenient histories I could think of for a film like this. There's honestly so much to talk about with its production and its rumors and its release that I'm actually gonna have to separate this video into two sections. If you want to hear me actually review the movie, skip to the timestamp posted here, cause otherwise I'm gonna go over everything surrounding it. First, a little bit of background. SpongeBob SquarePants is a franchise that's held close to me. It was one of the first things I ever obsessed over, and when you're an autistic child and you get obsessed with something, you get obsessed with it. I had it all. SpongeBob shirts, SpongeBob toys, I played the video games, I saw the first movie in theaters, I had a SpongeBob cake for my birthday one year. I was big into it. And as I got older, I naturally started to kind of drift apart from it. This was around the same time the show started to severely drop in quality and was just getting boring and gross.
Ow! Okay, it's on my foot.
Okay.
Years later, as a sad adult, what kind of relationship do I have with the show now? Well, I don't watch any of the new episodes, nor am I nearly as fanatical as I once was. But I still have my SpongeBob toy, I have SpongeBob clothing, I saw the second movie in theaters when it came out, and got the Blu-ray for it. I still rewatch the old episodes from time to time because it was once a brilliantly written show. I made an animation for it when I was 15 that's on this channel. I more recently made another animation for it to be featured in the upcoming SpongeBob movie Rehydrated. And I recently got the remastered version of Battle of Bikini Bottom. I guess I can never really escape the Sponge. He's a cultural icon and became such a ubiquitous part of my childhood and that of others that if you were to slap his face on a cardboard standee, I'd be like, okay, I'll be a slave to your system. Yes, that is me. This photo was taken earlier in the year when it was safe. The theater I was at, I've never been to. The hallways were darkly lit, and the standee was located by the bathroom, which is where that light's coming from. And it's interesting to note that because each film was made years apart from one another, kids' movies were following some sort of specific trend in each era. The first was made during the heyday of TV cartoons being made into theatrical movies, albeit it was like the last one for a while. The second was made to cash into the famous cartoon characters getting CG'd up in the real world trend, which is arguably still going on to this day, but it's a bit shaky on that front, as most of that movie was still a cartoon, and the live action parts were all in the third act, but that's what sold the movie. Now this one is made in the slightly tougher to define, semi-recent nostalgia pandering trend, where your film is often a soft reboot to a popular thing, that has to contain all the things people in the audience will recognize. Although I mostly see this in live action work, animated films have done this from time to time as well, arguably to introduce a newer generation to the hallmarks of the original. But the question is, was this film always gonna be this way? When it was announced after the success of Sponge Out of Water that another sequel would be made, it went through several delays over the months, and it was unclear what the movie was about or if it was going to be hand-drawn with live-action CG or not. Some early reports from people, like the showrunner at the time, seemed to insinuate it was indeed going this direction, until it was confirmed otherwise by the studio, which isn't too surprising in hindsight. On a Reddit AMA once, Mr. Krabs actor Clancy Brown confirmed that in the production of Sponge Out of Water, the studio was noticeably more controlling than before, and an online interview with the current chief at Paramount's animation division had them outright confirmed to not like hand-drawn animation, saying that it's too hard. Oh really? Even besides that flawed reasoning, SpongeBob is a character I feel you could get away with this, cause kids don't care if he's 2D, 3D, stop motion, or whatever. He's SpongeBob. So you have that, and then there's Camp Coral. When the first poster of the movie came out almost a year before its intended release date, it had a different title of It's a Wonderful Sponge, seeming to imply a wonderful life story, but its official plot synopsis says that it was going to be a prequel to the series, about how SpongeBob met his friends in summer camp. What? That sounds boring? But on top of that, they followed this up with the announcement that there was going to be a spin-off show set in that camp with all the characters as children. What? The news was announced not long after the unfortunate passing of SpongeBob's creator Steven Hillenburg. Now Hillenburg led a relatively private life, but the aforementioned showrunner who worked with Steven closely brought up how he would have hated the idea of such a spin-off. And there is credence to that idea. Nickelodeon from the very beginning wanted SpongeBob and friends to be aged down and go to school and do childlike activities, but this went against Hillenburg's creative vision for the show, so as a compromise, he created things like Mrs. Puff's Boating School, among others. Baby SpongeBob and Friends was a no-go, as far as Steven was concerned. Now that he's, dead, Nick must have seen this as an opportunity to create the type of show they wanted out of it. And it makes sense that they would. They're a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has frequently canceled shows for not matching up to the impossible standards of being their next flagship program. Why wouldn't they disrespect a dead man's wishes? But then the lead script coordinator behind Camp Coral came forward and stated that Steven was aware of this show before he passed. He was aware of its presence in the movie too. Considering both this show and the main one apparently share a crew, it seemed legitimate enough, if contradictory. Until that same coordinator changed his tune not long after, saying that Steven probably didn't know about the show as far as he was concerned, and that the movie went through so many changes in story and directors that nobody in either crew were really seeing eye to eye. So Camp Coral is very likely against Steven's wishes, and Nickelodeon is just being greedy bastards like they usually are. And although it's difficult to know for sure, the evidence seems to point that whether he knew about it or not, he wouldn't have liked it anyway. That would probably go the same for when the current president of Nickelodeon announced plans of making a SpongeBob universe of various shows and spin-offs, including a Patrick Star talk show, and some show starring Squidward or whatever. Which, may I remind you, this plan was set into motion after his death.
Suspicious.
Going back to the movie's production, although it seemed to be sticking towards the camp angle, a crew member decided to leak some animatics of an earlier story idea for the film, and it became clear that a lot has happened from point A to point Wumbo. This earlier idea for this seemingly hand-drawn movie was for the Bikini Bottom to suddenly be thwarted by evil alien cats. Yes, really. Nintendo did a video discussing these scenes in greater detail than I could here, but the point is, this was a story that they were going to go with until they apparently found it too weird even for SpongeBob, and they went back to the drawing board with a simpler premise. There was this one weird-ass piece of concept art I found, where SpongeBob and Sandy are in the human world, I guess, and they're facing off against several weird Black Manta-looking creatures, while Gary is being held captive by Will Ferrell. I also found that this was from a script draft that was approved by Hillenburg before his passing. When the movie finally started to go somewhere and finally had a trailer out, I was met with another shock. The title and plot has changed again. Now, it was Sponge on the Run, and it was about Gary. And Camp Coral was still there, but is apparently in far less of it. And okay, I'm not sure I understand where this is going, but I guess I'll be there opening weekend, May 2020. I obviously wasn't there May 2020, and neither was anyone for that matter. It was rescheduled to a couple months later because we didn't know how long this would last, but once it became clear we wouldn't even make that, Paramount decided it should skip theaters and go straight to on demand. I remembered thinking it was kind of a bummer, as I've always been there whenever the Cheese Boy appeared on the silver screen, but hey, I get it. It's a hard situation to really argue with. So I naturally assumed they were going to do what fellow animated films Trolls World Tour and Scoob did, by having their movie be a $20 digital rental released the day of their advertised release so the kids at home have something to watch while bored, right? Well, no. They decided to once again delay the film's release, this time to some yet-to-be-disclosed point in 2021, as an exclusive on their CBS All Access streaming service. Oh my god, if I were a kid and I was excited for this to come out, I would be so restless and impatient for its release.
What the frick are you guys doing?
It really makes all the millions spent on marketing and predetermined product tie-ins all the more awkward. If I bought this Pop-Tart, I could win a $13 movie ticket. What a deal! I remembered seeing an Old Spice ad promoting the film in the middle of summer, and at the end, instead of a release date, they just told the viewer to just see the movie. Okay. Where? Nowhere, it seems. It's indefinitely delayed, it's not out in theaters, or so we thought. 'Cause right out of the blue, Paramount announced that it was getting a theatrical release in August, but only in Canada.
What?
I mean, I get that Canada's been doing better than us for a long time now, but it feels as if you're inviting people to pirate your own movie. And that's not even getting into what's happening outside North America. In other parts of the world where CBS All Access doesn't exist, Netflix purchased the rights to stream it. I first thought, are they also gonna wait it out till next year? Apparently not, as they aren't beholden to a US schedule, so we'd be getting it November 5th, with the assistance of a VPN of course. That I don't know how to cast onto my television. I've tried, the instructions are way too much for me. So instead of viewing it from the comfort of my bed on my TV, I had to watch it on my computer screen and creaky office chair, both of which I spent all day editing with. Thanks, Paramount. I still couldn't help but find it weird why they would delay it for so long and treat it so carelessly. SpongeBob's a big icon. He's practically their franchise character, so I wondered what their deal was. So I booted up the movie app and sat back to watch it, and while registering the content on the screen on a deep intellectual level, I think I was able to understand what exactly their deal was for delaying it. The SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run is not very good. Alright, I'm about to finally review it now, but right before I do, there's something I need to preface. If you look below the video, you'll see the day this was posted in is November
18th.
2020. At this point in time, Sponge on the Run has not been released in America yet, and I don't know when it will. As far as I know, it'll be an exclusive to CBS, Paramount Plus, whatever the hell. So as of the time this video is out, I am talking about a movie that a lot of people haven't seen yet. And this is, weirdly enough, the second time I've come across a situation like this, as last week I talked about Hey Up Ka, a movie that's only on Filipino Netflix that also has a yet-to-be-determined release date in the States. But the thing is, I feel more pressure put onto me to talk about this film than that one, and it's pretty easy to explain why. Hey Up Ka is an independently produced foreign film that, depending on where you live, you could only previously hear about on specific animation enthusiast corners of the internet. Sponge on the Run is a major studio film that's had a Super Bowl spot, a trailer in front of Sonic, and a cardboard theater display, none of which the horny animal movie had. So regardless of what I'm going to say in the video, if you want to see the movie, and I mean really want to see it, then don't watch the rest of this. I won't outright spoil anything, but I am going to give a lot away. You want to see it, get a VPN, wait for however long it'll take to come out in the States, patchy to pirate it, maybe not that, I don't know, but regardless, all I'm going to leave you with is to lower your expectations for it. You good? Alright, let's move on. So the plot of this movie is that Plankton's been trying to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula for years, blaming his failures on Mr. Krabs, only to realize it's SpongeBob who's been his real enemy. Meanwhile, in Atlantis, King Poseidon, who's voiced by Matt Berry, weirdly not his only time in a SpongeBob movie, has been using snail slime to make himself look young, only to realize he's been using up the entire snail population, so he sends out a memo to bring the nearest snail over to his castle. Plankton gets word of this memo and abducts Gary, sending SpongeBob and Patrick to go out and save him. Eventually, the others miss having SpongeBob around, so they join too.
We gotta get SpongeBob back! We gotta get SpongeBob back! We gotta go! But how?
That's about it. It's a combination of Have You Seen This Snail and the first movie, only watered down to a corporate degree. And whatever else I haven't mentioned are things we've seen before, only not as good. I get that a franchise that has been running for more than 20 years is bound to retread a lot of ideas, but if it's an episode of the show, I wouldn't really care because, like I said, I don't even watch it anymore, but for a theatrical movie, one where you're expected to kinda up your game, really take people on an adventure unlike any other, it felt like a step back. How many times has Gary gone missing or separated? How many times has SpongeBob cried over him being gone? How many times has SpongeBob's absence left the Krusty Krab in complete chaos? How many times has SpongeBob been gone? I could excuse this of being something of a soft reboot to the first movie. Like, look, it's Goofy Goober. Look, it's the Patty Wagon. King Poseidon is in it and he looks different again. There's a scene where SpongeBob and Patrick have a wild night of partying and wake up the next morning hungover. Like, the similarities feel a little too blatant to be mere coincidence. But, you know, the first movie came out 16 years ago. Wait, really? Oh my god. 5-year-olds probably haven't seen it yet, so from a business standpoint, I get maybe retreading some old ground for the sake of selling those Pop-Tarts. But with a plot that's not only recycled but simplistic, to be used for your big Hollywood extravaganza feels a little, you know, lame. But hey, you know what? Sometimes what you lack in a story, you can make up for with jokes. I know this because the show was famous for doing this all the time. If you were to hear the basic episode premises of SpongeBob and Patrick sell chocolate door to door, Squidward leads a band practice, SpongeBob and Patrick paint Mr. Krabs' house, before watching said episodes, chances are you wouldn't describe them the same way afterward. Same goes for the movies as well. The second movie story was definitely a mess, but it made up for it by both having some good jokes as well as just being a weird-ass stoner adventure. The first movie had the best of both worlds, with a good story and good jokes. This movie doesn't have a good story, and the humor is equally up to snuff.
Do I smell a road trip?
That could be my breath.
A lot of it is generally pretty obvious low-hanging jokes or humor that has some pretty awkward execution. Some visual stuff, which I'll get into more, is okay. But I think a big part as to why the comedy's not written well is because the characters aren't written well. SpongeBob and Patrick are just both kinda annoying, and they have these really weird argument scenes that come right out of nowhere and feel unearned. Squidward, Mr. Krabs, and Sandy really aren't given much to do. Plankton, despite being the catalyst of the plot, is also pretty thinly used. There are no fun dynamics with anybody, whether it be with SpongeBob and Patrick in the first, or even SpongeBob and Plankton in the second. It has nothing new to say about anyone, which some works could get away with that if it's a property that's not on TV all the time. And whatever new characters this introduces are also pretty weak. There's this robot who's voiced by Aquafina for some reason, and its only joke is that it repeats phrases and engages in debauchery. King Neptune is just an over-the-top vain whiner, the type of character you think he is. There's one other new face that, if you've seen the trailer, it's pretty infamous who I'm talking about. It is a talking tumbleweed, played by the Baba Yaga himself, Neoano Logan. Now initially, I thought that scene in the trailer was going to be the only scene he appears in at all, but to my surprise, he actually becomes a recurring character who shows up fairly frequently. His whole role is to be some kind of spiritual advisor to SpongeBob and Patrick, as well as to hammer this theme that the movie's trying to push for some reason of courage.
I don't have the courage.
Someone better get the door. Who's gonna get the door?
But the one joke they always do with him is that whenever SpongeBob and Patrick are about to perform their mission, he reminds them of their goal or tells them to do or not do a thing, only for them to forget about their goal or do the opposite of whatever he said. That's all he's there for, to be a pointless foil. You know, Mindy from the first movie had a similar role of motivating the two as well, only for things to go comedically awry. But she had more of both a personality and a presence in the story that you couldn't just cut her out of it. Remember when Patrick did something dumb and SpongeBob's usually the one to react to it? And even when they both do the same thing, it often ends up having consequences to their present situations they didn't intend for? Well, they both just act and behave the same and go on wild misadventures to pad out the runtime. I actually want to analyze a similar scene in both the first movie and this one, where the two of them walk into a land of temptation where they have a wild night out and wake up the next morning hungover. But I want to focus on the outcomes of each event in particular. In the first, after their drunken ice cream bender, SpongeBob realizes he's late for work, only to remember that he's still mad at Mr. Krabs for giving away his deserved managerial position to Squidward on the basis that SpongeBob just isn't mature enough for the task. Meanwhile, King Neptune is at the Krusty Krab, wrongfully accusing Mr. Krabs of stealing his crown. When Mr. Krabs promises that he's not a crook and that anyone would vouch for him, SpongeBob arrives in the scene. Now usually, SpongeBob is someone who would vouch for Mr. Krabs, but given that he's both drunk and angry at him, he doesn't make him come off as very flattering, causing Neptune to attack Krabs, serving as a wake-up call to SpongeBob, who promises to return the King's crown to save Mr. Krabs' life. Every detail about that scene, even if it's portrayed in goofy SpongeBob fashion, actually builds to something and sets the plot into motion. Now let's compare that to the scene from Sponge on the Run. After a wild night of partying, SpongeBob and Patrick wake up, forgetting what they were doing there in the first place, until Keanu Weed reminds them that they are rescuing Gary, and then they just get up and do their thing. That whole segment served no purpose, it wasn't all that funny, and it could have been cut without necessarily affecting anything. Okay, I just remembered, the only reason for its inclusion is to set up some dumb thing about SpongeBob losing the coin Keanu gave him that's meant to symbolize courage and Wizard of Oz rules. But the theme of courage feels so underdeveloped, especially compared towards the other film themes of maturity and, hell, even teamwork. I probably remember more about the second movie than most people. Courage wasn't SpongeBob's problem, it was attention deficit disorder. I know it is, because I have it all the time. This film, on the other hand, has sluggish cognitive tempo. It's not very entertaining and it wastes a lot of time. Oh, and speaking of wasting time, I haven't even brought up how Camp Coral comes into play. There are flashback scenes where characters reminisce about their first meetings as children in summer camp, and god, dude, these scenes suck. First and foremost, SpongeBob and Sandy did not meet at camp. They met when SpongeBob happened upon her fighting a clam. That was one of the first episodes of the whole show, as well as one of the few canonical events to ever happen on the show. Get your facts straight.
Get real.
Secondly, all the flashbacks are basically the same in that SpongeBob walks up to a character and is like, "I'll be your friend," and then unintentionally inspiring them for the rest of their adult life. But like, the scenes themselves are so saccharine and cheesy, like they exist to teach life lessons or something. It really feels like a backdoor pilot of a show made for kindergartners, which it is. But you know what really grinds my gears the most about the flashbacks? Their placement. It would be one thing if they maybe all played at the beginning, kind of like setting up who everyone is, why they're all together, the usual. But only one of those scenes appear around the beginning, and it was the one in the trailer where SpongeBob meets Gary for the first time. And I didn't mind that too much, cause it was introduced naturally and it kinda had plot relevance. Every other scene, from him meeting Sandy to Patrick to Squidward, are shown far later in the movie, around the beginning of the third act. Their reason for being there is pretty clumsy, but they're also pretty lengthy scenes, each one being like 2 or 3 minutes or so, and every time one starts, the movie just grinds to a complete halt for the whole duration of these segments. It reminded me of when I saw Coco in theaters and it had that interminably long Olaf short at the beginning, only this wasn't nearly as painful as that. If anything, I'm just happy these segments weren't the movie. I would never watch a whole feature of this, let alone 6-ish minutes. But oddly enough, despite 6-ish minutes of screen time, 80% of the film's merchandise that's been released has been Camp Coral related, but it's only tied to this and not the upcoming show. The actual show, from what images and press they've released for it, is different in its portrayal. The animation looks more TV quality, several of the character designs are noticeably different, and the show has their child selves voiced by their regular actors, while the movie has them voiced by actual children. I mean, it's not the most deceptive marketing this franchise has ever done, but it's weird to build a whole campaign around what's basically a lie. This all feels like it was trying to sell first. It didn't have a good story to tell, it just wanted to exist because they knew they were gonna make money out of it. It feels cynical, like they were more concerned with following trends, such as celebrity voices and a pop soundtrack. Points for keeping the voice actors and not replacing them with celebrities, though. Granted, you could argue the other two had some of these as well. I mean, the previous literally ended with an epic rap battle of history. But I think coming out of films like Scoob or The Addams Family have really started to wise me up with how studios are selling their rebooted animation properties to the masses. Yet despite that, I don't consider this film to be nearly as bad as those. I mean, it's not that far, but it does have a few things that makes it more salvageable in the end, which is codename for let's talk about the animation. SpongeBob's animation always had a fun TV quality comic energy about itself that each movie captured well with some minor flourishes, mostly with better backgrounds and more vibrant color palettes. When they announced that this film would be completely computer generated, I was massively disappointed. Not only because the less hand-drawn animation in theaters the sadder I am, which is true, but by this point, we've already seen SpongeBob in 3D several times. What could they possibly do to impress us? Well, surprisingly, quite a bit. The movie was animated at Meat Growth Digital, the same studio that did Captain Underpants. And with that in mind, they really know how to take a specific art style and give it
digital magic.
For one thing, the frame rate is noticeably dropped down to better imitate the movements in the original show, which not only looks neat, but it reminds me of both the Peanuts movie that had a very similar aesthetic, and their stop-motion holiday specials that also translated their movements well. The textures on everything are also interesting to point out. Like on SpongeBob himself, you notice all these pores on his skin. Or if Sandy, you can not only make out her fur, but all these cracks and chips on her helmet too. It's enough detail to be fairly noticeable, but not enough to like, you know, gross you out. There's lots of good posing, really nice background work. I love some of the subtle particle effects that are added sometimes. They do a great job translating a lot of the more out there facial expressions and gag work that the show would do. It gives gives me Hotel Transylvania vibes, which I consider somewhat complimentary. Speaking of, I noticed this and the third Hotel Transylvania do the same thing where the characters go to Atlantis and it's portrayed as this grand Las Vegas style place. Coincidence? I think probably. Aside from some very minor gripes, such as a pretty noticeable reusing of extras, this is great work. You could pause it at any time and it would look like one of those over-detailed Disney DVD covers. Quite nice indeed. There was one scene I found sorta fun in a really stupid way. It's a dream sequence, kind of, and it's in the middle of the movie, but I'm basically gonna give it all away here. It starts with SpongeBob and Patrick driving around a desert area in the surface world. On their stop, they meet Keanu and walk into a bar populated by zombie pirate people. They gather around to dance in an EDM rap number headlined by Snoop Dogg. It is then interrupted by the arrival of an evil vampire-like soul reaper named El Diablo, played by Danny Trejo. He abducts SpongeBob and Patrick with the intention of killing them, only for them to inadvertently discover his weakness to sunlight, killing him instead. All the zombie people's souls are freed thanks to his death, and then he briefly comes back as a tornado man, and then it just kind of ends there. It's so bizarre and out of left field and dumb and shot like a Disney Channel video, and it serves no purpose whatsoever to anything. It's like its own self-contained short film in the middle of the actual film, but it was amusing. It had the kind of weird energy I wanted out of this. It reminded me of why I liked Sponge Out of Water, which had several scenes like that, only crazier. Is it probably there to sell some Snoop Dogg pop hit? Most likely. Is it up there with the funniest moments of the show? Not remotely. But it tries to share a similar creative DNA that the rest of the movie sorely lacks. I want to mention the music real quick, as there's a surprising amount of licensed songs played throughout, which is another odd trend I'm noticing with kids' movies these days. While not overused to the extent of something like the second Angry Birds movie, which can't go 5 minutes without playing a song, they do like to pay some royalties whatever chance they get.
And I, friend, am the Dream Weaver.
There's a couple songs by Weezer in this, one of them being written for the movie, while the other being their cover of Take On Me for some reason. And the credits just play some pop song in Spanish. Like, nothing against the Spanish language, it's just kind of a surprising choice. But I think the strangest song choice I can recall was during SpongeBob and Patrick's Vegas escapade, where they start singing to Upside, Inside Out. I never thought that another animated movie post Shrek 2 would ever touch that song again. I remembered reading about the production of the first film and how adamant Steven Hillenburg was with his choices for the soundtrack, refusing to go after popular songs and artists and instead sticking with who he likes, which is why that album had people like Ween and the Flaming Lips and Wilco on it. And it's awesome, it's a great soundtrack, partly because it displayed unconventional, talented artists for this major Hollywood feature. Imagine an alternate timeline if the first film never ended with Ocean Man. Like, it's so iconic now, what would you replace it with? Waving My Dick in the Wind, from the very same album Ocean Man came from?
I'm waving my dick in the wind. I'm waving my dick in the wind.
Unconventionality, weirdness, uniqueness is what this was missing. It's what gave the show its identity, and what this lacks. It just reeks of being a boring corporate product. And I'd like to remind you, this film has a scene in which SpongeBob and Patrick murder a vampire, played by Danny Trejo, and it still ended up a boring corporate product. How does that happen? Well, I have a bit of a theory that's all traced back to its writer-director. This was brought to us by Tim Hill, who on one hand was a writer for the show during its early years, was a good friend of Hillenburg, and helped with the first movie script. But on the other hand, he is also the acclaimed filmmaker who brought us Muppets from Space, Max Keeble's Big Move, Garfield, A Tale of Two Kitties, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Hop, Grumpy Cat's Worst Christmas Ever, and the recent theatrical smash hit, The War with Grandpa. He's very much a director for hire who makes mostly forgettable family films and would listen to what a studio tells him to do. Nothing inherently wrong about that, but he's now heading a project he helped shape. So it must have been an interesting situation for him, trying to have to stay true to Hillenburg's vision while also having to appeal to the corporate higher-ups. And it's a shame that the latter seem to have more of an influence than the former. As I've said earlier, I've seen worse reboots than this. It's not nearly as soulless of a husk as something like Scoob or the Addams Family, but this is a husk of what Spongebob was. I know everyone involved made this with the best intentions to Hillenburg, and maybe he would have liked this. I don't know. I don't know the guy. But this guy did. In the end, I feel Sponge Has the Runs will be more remembered for the weird circumstances surrounding its release than the movie itself. As someone who's enjoyed all the previous films, this is the only one I am not interested in rewatching or owning. While it does have great animation and a couple decent moments, it's too boring, unoriginal, unfunny, and forgettably generic to really be worth waiting for. There have been far, far worse SpongeBob things in existence, but it's just disappointing that a franchise I once loved is just going down a plain, unambitious route such as this. Rewatch the first movie, wait for the rehydration of the first movie, watch the anime that was made. Watch those instead. Don't try to give in to this pile of Yeah, this reference doesn't really work unless I say sounds like a load of 4 out of 10.